This is Thursday, November 16th, 2017. Welcome to News from the Roots on Mountain Stream TV. We just rushed into the studio today. This is Zev Friedman that's with me today. Zev happens to be my son, pure coincidence. And we've been taking down an old shed on our property here outside of Dillsboro. And so we made it look a little scruffy, and we just rushed into the studio this morning to get started here. But Zev's working on several very interesting projects. Actually, we've had you on the show before. This is the second time you've been on the show.
Yeah.
But you're expanding. Last time you came on, you and Courtney talked about permaculture and the roots of that movement and what it means. And now this idea is expanding, not only for you, but for many people, into other aspects of our lives other than agriculture, which is maybe where it began. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, with your idea of the mutual aid society. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the official kind of white paper that I've written on it is called "Taking Our Future Back Through Mutual Aid Societies," and that's based on the premise that, in a lot of ways, we are dealing with our future being stolen by extreme catastrophic climate change, by species extinction, by genocide, by corporate oligarchy taking over our nation and many nations, an international dynamic, and that most people who are working in social and ecological change find ourselves working steeply uphill against a game that is essentially controlled and designed and then played by people who are far more interested in consolidating wealth and power than they are in creating well-being for ecosystems and people. And so, like you have been doing your whole adult life, I've now been constantly struggling with the question of how do we take effective change in that context? How do we create effective change in that context? How do we take our future back from what is an increasingly desperate situation? And the mutual aid society approach is an old, I'll even say ancient, strategy that has been employed cross-culturally and continuously all the way up through the present time by people who don't necessarily have a lot of wealth, but use strength in numbers to pool resources and accomplish things in the midst of power dynamics that would otherwise disempower them. And so, for instance, in Russia during World War I, there were multi-village mutual aid societies, which were formal arrangements. That's a big difference. Mutual aid societies are not just a loose collaboration, but it's actually a formal, sometimes ritualized commitment.
Now we're talking about Soviet Russia, or prior to that, under the Tsar?
Well, World War I is what I'm talking about. When there's a book by someone named Kropotkin, who was a Russian who was living in Britain when he wrote the book. The book is called Mutual Aid as a Factor in Evolution. And he goes through many, many examples of mutual aid, both in non-human biology and also in human culture. And so that's where I've gotten a lot of the historical examples. But so he gives one example, and I'll go back to Kropotkin for a second. But in Russia in World War I, when armies were coming in and destroying entire villages in one day, burning all their houses down, burning all their crops, stealing all their food, and the one way that these villages, the villagers, were able to survive was through their pre-established mutual aid societies, where other villages who were in their mutual aid group would then come rebuild their village for them and feed them through the winter.
So just to clarify, this isn't necessarily an aspect of socialism as it is,
No, it's a grassroots cooperative structure.
In some ways, it's part of nature too, because I think you'd find insects and other animals that by de facto have mutual aid relationships.
Absolutely, yeah. So Kropotkin was a contemporary of Darwin.
Right.
And of Charles Darwin, and he spent the whole first third of his book. The book is called Mutual Aid, a Factor in Evolution. And the entire first third of the book is him saying, actually, cooperation is a more dominant pattern in biology and ecosystems than competition is. And Darwin himself described that and recorded evidence and wrote to that point. But that what happened is the Industrial Revolution architects in Britain, the aristocrats who essentially who designed the Industrial Revolution and executed it, wanted ideologies and science to back up their economic policy, and they cherry-picked Darwin's research for the stuff about competition and the phrase survival of the fit. But it turned out survival of the, yes, life does survive that is most fit, but actually what makes life the most fit is cooperation, more often statistically than competition. And Kropotkin spends the first third of his book describing many examples of how animals, plants, fungi work together, especially within species, more than they compete within species. For instance, something as simple as penguins grouping together and in a very cold winter and then taking turns on the inside of the group staying warm, whereas one or a few of them together at a time would all freeze to death. And that's a very elegant demonstration, actually, the thermodynamics of sharing, of how we see that at a mid-scale of collaboration, it's almost determined by the laws of physics. There are benefits of scale and how resources are used. For example, in the neighborhood that I live in at Earthhaven Eco Village, we have this microgrid, which is a collaborative, off-the-grid photovoltaic system. And we discovered through looking at the economics of it that rather than each home replacing its own, because there were these aging out mid-90s solar systems on each home, including the batteries, rather than each home having to replace their system for $10,000 to $15,000 a piece, that we could pool money and in total end up spending $5,000 to $8,000 per household and getting a better system with one combined photovoltaic array, one battery array, one generator as backup, underground lines run to everyone's houses, and actually save lots of money and have a more reliable and less polluting system through collaboration.
And to be clear, that system, nobody's selling electricity.
No.
So that doesn't break the law in North Carolina.
No.
Ironically, if it had been structured differently, you did exactly the same thing, but if it had been structured differently, it would be illegal in North Carolina because nobody but Duke Energy is allowed to sell it.
No, we're not selling. We just all own the equipment together.
Yeah.
So that's just an example of the similar thermodynamic reality of cooperation that many species, including humans, have discovered, and that there's this sweet spot where if we collaborate, it makes life possible. And our species actually grew up, and Kropotkin details this, really from the very beginning, our species is developed around working collaboratively in groups of 150 to 500 people at the clan level, and that what mutual aid societies was a later cultural innovation with humans saying, you know what, this 150 to 500 person scale is not quite big enough to get the desired effect of human survival. It doesn't give us quite enough insurance, and especially once authoritarian states started to develop, it didn't give quite enough leverage against the military power of authoritarian states.
Just for your information as we proceed, look at the camera, not at the monitor. I do this all the time too.
Yeah.
But I tend to sometimes look at the screen too. But
thank you.
Okay.
I'm not a professional TV interviewer.
And apparently, I am not either. So,
so then people took this. We could call it an insight, but really it was a survival strategy. And ever since, at least since the beginning of agriculture 8,000 years ago, we've had these mutual aid societies. Anthropologists call them mutual aid societies. People have called them many different things. The Cherokee called them gadugi, and they have historical mutual aid societies, which they're more qualified to speak on than I am, but I've read a little bit.
So like, for instance, in the Cherokee, Gadugi.
Gadugi. Yeah.
How many people were involved, and what type of activities were shared within that Gadugi?
Gadugi. Well, and again, I would love to actually find if there were any Cherokee folk who wanted to come on and speak about that. That would be fascinating.
Yeah. I've been thinking the new chief in Cherokee is supposed to be a very progressive, environmentally conscious person. I'd love to speak with him.
Yeah, so the only things I know are a few things I've read on the internet, so I don't claim to have any authority about that, but what I've read is that Gadugi started with agricultural cooperation, that it was a mutual aid society that started with people helping each other farm their own family's plots during the work bursts of the year, planting, major hilling and planting beans to grow up the corn, and then harvesting at the end, but then it then extended to other types of aid within that same group. Say that someone's house burned down, it was the Gadugi that came together to rebuild the house. Or say that a child's parents died, it was the Gadugi that adopted the child.
It's just almost like a Mennonite or
very much
similar culture to that. I mean that aspect of it.
Yeah, but in my understanding, I don't know about with the Cherokee, but with humans in general, mutual aid societies are less based on blood kinship than clans are. Clans are the kind of archetypal human organizational structure that we've had for a long time, which is like an extended family, blood family. But what mutual aid society was an innovation in was pushing the collaborative interdependence beyond the immediate blood family level. And so
to an economy of scale that works.
But a key point to that is to an economy of scale that works, but it's big enough to get the desired effect, but small enough to continue accountability. Democratically is how we say it now, but they didn't have the word democracy 8,000 years ago, but they would have said it differently, but the same effect.
Maybe keep the size within a certain proportion so that everybody can know everybody.
Well, maybe it's even bigger than that. Maybe it's too big for everyone to know everyone, because the sociologists say that a human cannot really know more than 2,000 people.
Oh, so a mutual aid society would be how?
Some of them are bigger than that. So, for instance, fast forwarding into the United States and the history of mutual aid societies here, some of the most prominent and effective ones have been the African American mutual aid societies, which were formed during Jim Crow, right after the Civil War.
During Reconstruction.
Yeah, because what the situation was is that, okay, now there are African Americans who, technically speaking, could own property and so on, but in effect, as we know, were barred from most forms of economic empowerment. And the banks who loan money for buying houses and starting businesses, etc., were owned by white supremacists. And so the African American community said, we need to take matters into our own hands. And they formed mutual aid societies, which had lending pools, or what later became...
So they bought land collectively?
No, not necessarily, although in some cases, but more what they did is they pooled money in lending pools or community-owned credit unions that were controlled democratically by the mutual aid society, therefore able to make choices of who the lending pool lent money to buy land, buy houses, start businesses. They even started hospitals.
And this happened throughout the South?
Throughout the South, yeah, and the North.
In North Carolina, I mean?
Yeah, I've been looking into the names of the specific ones, but I do believe it happened in North Carolina. And then... it'd
be very interesting to find precise history about it.
There's an entire book on this exact topic, African American mutual aid history.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, from 18 1960 to 1976 or no, 1967.
Do you remember the author's name?
I don't offhand, but we can follow up with that.
Yeah.
And and so it was extremely effective, and they were able to accomplish things, and that was the beginning of a lot of black institutions in the country. And then working with churches, those were some of the main social organization structures that allowed African Americans to organize for the civil rights movement. And so what it does is, through economic collaboration, it meets everyone's needs, basic needs for food, shelter, healthcare, education, and then once those basic needs are covered, then there's a collaborative structure in place for political organizing.
And so, did these mutual aid societies that formed in the South for African Americans,
Yeah.
did they meet with resistance, and were there strong efforts to break
Suppress
them
them.
up, or what was the history of that? Do they still exist?
So I believe some of them do, but here's what happened is that they met with at least economic resistance, and I haven't read this book that I referred you to yet, so I don't know all the details, but I just read articles online so far. Definitely the resistance they did meet with is from the health industry, because they built hospitals. They were African American mutual aid owned hospitals.
Wow.
And what happened is that the hospital, the emerging, embryonic form of our current health industry in the early 1900s, before the Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid came online, they were an industry, just like they are now, and they wanted to put their competitors out of business.
They existed for the purpose of providing health care, not for
That's right.
making a profit.
The mutual aid ones did, but the ones who were profiters lobby the legislatures to institute hospital building codes that were so rigorous and unachievable at the scale of a mutual aid hospital that they put mutual aid hospitals out of business, and became dominant. And then the federal programs of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid came online.
I wonder how this ties into also the institutionalization of the profession of what was defined by Western medicine as real medicine versus historic
herbalism
and other what we now refer to as alternative medicines, which were at one time the only medicine. So phasing that out and giving the label and the status of legal legal practice only to one branch of medicine.
Good point. And that's one of the things that I want to focus on and change via our mutual aid society and a national effort of mutual aid societies is health care versus health insurance. And that big distinction. Health insurance right now is a profit-focused endeavor. The thing that we are all paying money into, even Obamacare is paying money into, is health insurance, which is a profit endeavor. That's what it's for. And that's why health insurers do everything they can to get out of paying anything they can. And
although Obamacare did address that to some degree, but by eliminating pre-existing conditions.
To some degree, right.
Yeah.
I got personal experience with it not addressing it. But anyway, that's another story.
Okay.
But health care is a system whose primary goal is human health and well-being. And that's much different than health insurance, and it cuts costs too because it takes out the profit motive. Which is, my understanding, is 30 to 40% of the gross revenue of health insurance.
There's a number of things. I mean that make it more expensive, including the profit motive for shareholders in the insurance company, the administrative costs, exorbitant salaries for administrators and bonuses, advertising costs. And the idea of a Medicare for all system, it creates the largest pool possible and creates that economy of scale, which drives the cost down as well. And so Anyway,
Yeah, exactly. And so at the same time that we need that scale to drive the cost down, we also need, in my opinion, healthcare to be a more human endeavor, human scale endeavor, something that is managed in communities, but funded at a large scale. That's, in my opinion, healthcare, universal healthcare, single-payer healthcare. The best way to do it would be to have funding at the federal scale paid for by the federal government through our taxes, but that funding is directed through regional mutual aid societies with healthcare cooperatives that employ doctors, healthcare professionals, hospitals who are run by those communities and therefore accountable at a regional level to their constituencies.
Right. I mean, it's really Medicare for all. Insurance is just half the equation.
Exactly.
The other half
is the delivery of the healthcare.
Is the delivery of the healthcare, and if we continue with
Right.
the present course, those costs are enormous.
Right.
Because it's such an inefficient
Right.
system.
Exactly.
So yeah, I agree. We have to address that.
And
yeah.
And the biggest thing, or a big thing, like you were saying, is redefining what healthcare is. And here's where we get to the connection with permaculture. You know, permaculture is a holistic practice. It says everything is connected to everything else. How do we recognize those connections and actually design systems that integrate the functionality of different parts of human life? And recognizing that healthcare is not just about going to doctors and going to hospitals and taking pharmaceutical drugs or herbs. Healthcare is a holistic feature of a healthy human ecosystem.
Right.
Meaning, right now, where's all the cancer coming from? Where is all the heart disease coming from? Where is all the depression coming from?
So addressing nutrition and diet, exercise, prevention essentially.
Exactly.
And instead of treating the symptoms of the disease after they occur.
And then once you get to the point where someone does have a chronic or an acute disease, treating that with all methods, evidence-based methods at our disposal, not just pharmaceuticals that are driven by a profiting pharmaceutical industry, but also by herbs that work and other techniques that work. And
getting pharmaceuticals from different sources.
Well, yeah.
Or doing something to limit the costs, the outrageous costs of and profits of the pharmaceutical industry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's and there's the insight that many of our diseases in our culture, our society, don't just emerge from physical origins. They emerge from relational, societal, emotional sources. The fact that we live in an isolated nuclear family society, that's a big source of a lot of the depression. People don't have their needs for love and connection and meaningful relationships met. They don't have mentorship. They don't have a sense of purpose in life through what comes from living in a more intact culture and society where it's a multi-featured, integrated village-style life. And so we're not about to be able to design ourselves back into village-style lives quickly. But a mutual aid society is a way of saying, okay, economic cooperation is actually a first step, in a sense, a way of tricking ourselves into a more meaningful, collaborative environment where once we start to have a credit union at a regional scale, that everyone who's a member of the society, of our mutual aid society, has their money in this credit union and uses it as our daily retail bank, and we have millions of dollars a year to loan to all kinds of projects that we democratically agree on, then we have a sense of togetherness and cohesion. We're all working towards common goals and vision, and we're economically, functionally interlinked. That's a basis for also relational and community glue. That's actually a starting point for getting out of some of the isolation of American individualism that we've created.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding you right, like you're not talking necessarily against the concept of marriage between two individuals.
No.
But what we have now, the system has been bred or incentivized for this concept of extreme nuclear family, where it's like two people against the world.
Yeah.
You know, and that is, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's a way. I mean, believing in that type of system keeps people separate. It keeps people separated. It prevents collaboration.
Yeah.
On the level really that's necessary for survival and good health and economic prosperity.
Yeah.
It forces people to be isolated, maybe to suffer depression, maybe to inhibit growth of economic entities other than the corporate entities that already exist and control us.
Yeah, that's right. And who has time to set up alternative economic entities when people are struggling in little isolated pairs to raise children, make a living, deal with the infrastructure of their house, make meals, deal with their aging parents, all of the things together because it's a disintegrated culture.
And we're not saying don't get married and live happily ever after. What we're saying,
you'll be in the statistical minority.
What we're saying is prior to this society we live in now of extreme nuclearism, people got married, but they lived in villages together and shared child care, shared taking care of the elderly, and shared the expenses of creating different organs like healthcare, organs that benefited everybody in the village. Education was the same way. They would help educate each other's children. They would help with child care with their, and all of these things which we're lacking, and only in the last 100 years or so.
Yeah.
Or let's say since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, essentially, when it benefited corporations to have for people to live apart and just feed into their process.
The company store.
The company store, right? So you get paid by the company, and then you go and spend all your money in the company store, which is frighteningly what if you go to Walmart. Since Walmart's come to Silva, it created 300 something jobs in this community. But it's very frightening if you go and you talk to one of those employees. They spend almost their entire salary at Walmart after work.
It's almost like it's designed that way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we get out of that trap? And that's why I'm calling the article I've written, the white paper, Taking Our Future Back Through Mutual Aid Societies, because the vision is that this is a way to set up modular units of community collaboration at a grassroots scale throughout the United States and world. It's already happening in other places in the world too, by the way. And there's something called I'll give a shout out to the Mutual Aid Network, which is run by Stephanie Rearick and company that is based in Madison, Wisconsin. And Stephanie Rearick is traveling around the world helping people to get mutual aid networks going, which is a similar, certainly a collaborative or a symbiotic idea with this one. She's not as focused on credit unions as I am. But I think that a big key to all of this is using credit unions, which is this very good banking institution that was created in the United States, and it's now used around the world. By the way, there's an international collaborative of credit unions that is really interesting. They actually loan money to groups to start credit unions in different places. But because the thing about a credit union is that it is community owned and it is mission driven. Again, just like a healthcare cooperative, it's not profit driven, it's mission driven.
So that maybe lower interest loans.
Exactly.
Could be an issue.
Lower interest loans.
And maybe different standards for who gets a loan.
Well, maybe. But certainly you need to have professional vetting of loans because you need to have an idea be solvent. But then once you've picked through the solvent ideas, then the group that owns the credit union can democratically decide which things to fund.
Right.
And so imagine mutual aid society in Western North Carolina with 20,000 members and a lending pool of 20 or 30 million dollars, and you can, from what I understand, a credit union can loan about a quarter of its principal each year. That becomes $5 to $8 million a year that organization can lend out to people starting businesses or local media outfits like Mountain Stream TV or different types of farming and climate resilient agricultural endeavors.
The community at large.
Yeah, and also people buying houses or starting housing co-ops or building affordable housing and starting the healthcare co-op itself. So the two major projects I see.
Exciting idea.
Yeah, I think so. And so the two major projects I see as the nucleus of the mutual aid society are the credit union and a healthcare cooperative, because those are two very high leverage things that our community needs, that are a big gap, as we all know. We don't have good healthcare accessible to us at an affordable rate, and we don't have banks that are funding any of our endeavors at the scale that we need to address climate change and to address the fragmentation and social issues that are so acute right now in our lives. You know?
And I can even envision that the people or the organizations that borrow the money, there'd be several more dynamic there to make sure the loans get paid back. I mean, there's peer pressure because so much, but beyond that, there's also the community has a stake in the loan getting paid back, and a stake in the project that it's funding.
Exactly. They've chosen the project.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there might be, less of a tendency to immediately foreclose if a payment is missed. There might be an effort to raise money in the community to help pay off the loan.
Right.
I mean, and so there's a more chance of the economic viability of that bank and the credit union.
Exactly.
And it's a community effort.
Yeah. Basically,
not only to lend the money, but to pay it back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They've got every incentive for the project to succeed.
Right.
Whereas a bank has a normal bank has all kinds of incentives for a project to fail, because they get all the money that they've been paid and they get the collateral.
Well, they don't necessarily get all the money that...
Sure, if I have a mortgage on a house to a normal bank, and I pay $50,000 on the mortgage and then I default, they keep my $50,000 and the house.
They keep your $50,000, but if the house is worth $100,000, they lose.
Well, let's not go into that.
Yeah, okay.
But to your point, that the incentive structure is changed. It's to support the success of the endeavors, because they're endeavors that the community has chosen.
It's again, the nuclear family isn't on its own in paying back that loan, and the burden is not completely on just the two people or the one person who borrows the money.
Right. And so then it's like what I see us as being in a long, slow crisis in American society. We basically, middle class and poor people, have been in a crisis in this country since the beginning, but especially since the Industrial Revolution. And it's just that it plays out in slow motion, and you don't get to see inside people's homes and lives how this crisis is unfolding. And we need a better system to take care of ourselves. So that's the first thing, is how to take care of especially low-income people and working class people to meet our basic needs, so we're not stressing out about having just access to high-quality food, housing, healthy communities, safety, healthcare, good education. If we can just get those things taken care of first, then we can breathe a little bit and have more energy to actually engage in the political system in this country. Because I see our low voting rates in this country are not only a symptom of apathy and a sense
I don't think there is apathy.
Well, but they're partially a symptom of people believing that their votes don't matter because they're so cynical about the system.
Right.
But they're also
that's the truth.
It's also a symptom of deliberate design by the corporatocracy that makes people's lives so difficult that participating in democracy, even the basic act of voting, much less participating more heavily than that, is almost logistically impossible for most people because they're so strapped just trying to survive.
Right.
And that's deliberate design.
I agree.
That's part of the...
Yeah, otherwise Election Day would be a national holiday and
For
everybody
instance.
would... Yeah.
And then, as we know, voting is only the tip of the iceberg of what a healthy democracy requires. A healthy democracy requires people to actively stay informed about the issues like you're trying to do with Mountain Stream TV, and then to be in constant contact with legislators, letting them know that we're holding them accountable on specific issues, to be running candidates ourselves who are standing up for all the things that we know need to be stood up for, to be taking grassroots action when necessary, to be affecting the course of politics, and people who don't have energy to even go vote are not participating at that level. So I see mutual aid societies as actually a way of taking our politics back by providing for basic needs so that people have a little, that 10 or 20% of breathing room that we need to just be able
Maintain
to...
a democracy.
Yeah, and then also through the network of the mutual aid societies themselves becoming an organizing tactic for politics, both for getting the vote out, but also for disseminating information and for organizing effective political action in between elections.
About how the political system works.
Exactly.
Right now, I mean, the state of affairs is that most people are completely ignorant of how the political system works, even as it should work.
Yeah.
I mean, but as it is constitutionally designed to work, people don't understand.
Yeah.
I mean, there have recently been polls taken where people don't know that there are 3 branches of government.
Right.
You know, and what the functions are of those branches.
Exactly.
So,
not to mention the history of what has been tried and succeeded and failed in this country in the politics, so that we can make decisions that are informed based on that record of success and failure.
well, that's true too.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's why I think Mountain Stream TV is so valuable. And and so, for instance, I could see a mutual aid society choosing to support local media, and that's actually, I want to mention one of the exciting ideas. We just had I was at a retreat with an organization called Unite WNC. If viewers get a chance to check that out. And what that is mostly a group of people who are very skilled in tech, who are programmers and coders and work in the tech world, who've gotten together to work on social change projects in Western North Carolina, volunteering mostly, but also wanting to make income and figure out how to make a livelihood doing this work themselves. And so...
Is Ty Halleck involved?
He's involved, yeah, and a bunch of other people, and it was a very exciting retreat. One of the ideas that I brought to that we developed in that retreat was this idea of a mutual aid society dashboard. And what that would be, a dashboard is a web developer's term for a website that has a lot of different functions on it, so you can manage a lot of complex things from there. But what this dashboard would be is something that you could use as your home page. You'd open up your computer, and you would have your credit union account there. It would have all kinds of information about healthcare in the region that day, childcare available that day, different foods available from local farmers who are members of the Mutual Aid Society that day, so you could order it, pay for it right there, pick it up at a drop-off point close to you. Mountain Stream TV, the programs that are showing that day, all in one kind of customizable format. So what that would be is a very easy, intuitive way to interact with the region and your mutual aid society of people who are sharing values and sharing this interdependence, like you were eloquently talking about. And so it would be a glue, again, another way of having a daily glue connecting us with people with shared values and shared economic interdependence, because we would all be owning this credit union together. So that's one of the first projects that we're talking about developing in the next 2 months, actually, is a prototype of this dashboard that would allow people to start using and interacting. It's going to take probably a couple years to get the credit union online and the healthcare co-op online, because those are big projects, but eventually those would be integrated into the dashboard.
So who's involved in this in Western North Carolina?
Well, so I am looking to spearhead just the founding of it. It needs to be a democratically owned organization and democratically run organization, not something with just charismatic leaders or whatever. but everything needs a point
Mutual
person
Aid
to start with.
Society Incorporated.
Right, exactly right. But so what I'm looking to do is to actually start a Patreon, a crowdfunding campaign to fund myself for several years in founding it and getting all the key players involved, because I don't know anything about founding credit unions or healthcare cooperatives.
But this woman in Madison, Wisconsin,
Stephanie
can
Rearick.
offer.
Yeah, so
help.
that's one of the steps, is to do what she calls a summit, which we're looking at doing in summer of 2018, which is organizing this 5 to 7 day summit, which is a kind of a deep dive into
Organizing like in Asheville.
Yeah, exactly, in Asheville most likely. A deep dive into a collaborative design process for the Mutual Aid Society. So that look for that likely in August of 2018 is when we're looking at that. That'll be one step. And then also there was a group of people, because Stephanie Rearick was just in Asheville a couple weeks ago.
Oh.
We had a group of 15 people come to that event. And
Well, that's what is it? Can you mention who those people were, or who they represented? What organizations?
I can't list all of them offhand. They were the new people to me. We have a newsletter or a listserv going at this point, though, an email conversation following up with next steps. And
I guess it's not important, but I'm just. It seems like there is interest. I mean, you put this out, and there are definitely others who are tuned into what you're talking about, and are expressing keen interest.
I mean, every person I tell about this to, every person I tell this to it thinks it's a good idea, and I feel like this cooperative economics is in our genes. I mean, everyone, when we say, oh yeah, we need more...
It's in my empty wallet.
Yeah, exactly. And every person, when they're presented with the possibility of collaborative economics and solving our own daily problems through this type of approach, or addressing our own daily challenges, is immediately turned on by it, because we all recognize the power in the idea. And that's another key aspect of this is, me being a participant and observer in social change projects for about 20 years now, and you've been at it for 50 years, is, seeing the pattern that burnout, essentially, is it when we're all attempting to, like we were saying, volunteer the fringes of our energy beyond the survival of the daily survival effort, volunteer that fringes of our energy bank for altruistic projects. Those projects are almost by design, or by their beginning framing, they're going to be struggling, because we're working with the fringes of our energy, the margins. We need to design, in my opinion, collaborative organisms whose core activities, the 90% of the energy, are accomplishing the things that need to be accomplished for human well-being and ecological well-being. So what that means is setting it up so that we're not asking people to constantly do altruistic things. And that's what I think the Mutual Aid Society is setting it up so that it's meeting your basic needs first and foremost, and through meeting your basic needs, it's actually accomplishing things for the larger well-being.
Right. Yeah.
And that sets up
makes so much sense.
It sets up a totally different dynamic than asking people to commit their hard-earned money through donations or their time at the fringes of their survival activities for altruistic efforts. So it's trying to set up a different dynamic, in my opinion, to oppose or to present an alternative to the corporate hell that is currently descending on our planet. The corporations are extremely well-funded and organized, and they are devoting their full energies all the time.
Unlimited financial resources, because they've taken all the wealth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're devoting all of that wealth all the time to enacting their agenda. How can we, using 5% of our energy, and 5% of our money, which is a much smaller amount to begin with, possibly contest that giant, well-organized machine?
By planting seeds that grow.
That's right.
Which is exactly what you're talking about doing, I think. It's not something, we're not talking about a revolution that's going to succeed overnight and suddenly have to take on the responsibilities of everything.
No.
Right.
No, but there is a time component, especially with healthcare.
Sure.
Healthcare is such an issue that's up in our society, and my hope is that we will be ending up with single-payer healthcare very soon. But also also, I think it's important that we get healthcare cooperatives in place that are ready to receive that funding and be well enough organized and structured to create confidence, both from the funders and from the members, and also to do a good job of providing healthcare. Right. And so that actually means there is some time urgency here, because hopefully single-payer healthcare is going to come sooner rather than later.
I think it will.
We'll take over the federal government again and get that going on. But that means that we have to have these things in place, because there's going to be some structure that's created at that point.
Right.
And usually, once a structure gets created, there's a lot of inertia.
Yeah.
So we'd rather get that going from the beginning.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, just talking about healthcare is and right. separating that
exactly.
as an issue is not reality.
That's right.
It's again, everything is connected
That's
to
right.
everything.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
an ecology.
Right.
We because of the system we have, we tend to address these issues separately, one at a time.
Yeah.
But we really can't do that. If any one is going to succeed, it
right.
means the economic system itself has to be adapted to accommodate a single-payer healthcare
yeah.
system, to accommodate free college for everyone,
right.
to accommodate equality for women and
right.
and minorities and people who are underprivileged, yeah. and in fact to end the whole system of income inequality yeah. and wealth inequality, disparity in this country. Yeah. It means an evolution of the entire system yeah. and recognizing the ecology and how one issue is relating to another and,
yeah.
and revamping the whole system.
Yeah, exactly. And that type of systems thinking mm-hmm. is so lacking in state and federal government, right. especially. And I can see how it got there. It's because the issues, even a small topic, is so big when you get to the federal scale. Even looking at healthcare is such a giant, complex topic when you get to the federal scale.
Right.
That what has been adopted as a strategy is to hone in on separate issues and attempt to address those. But as you say, it's truly impossible to address them because they are interconnected.
Yeah.
And maybe eventually we will have systems thinkers, maybe we'll have permaculturalists running the federal government and the state governments. May it be so. But that might be a ways from now. And so we're saying, how do we take our power back for now on on the scale that we can do best, and plant the seed at a scale that we do have influence over at this time, and then work outwards from that controlled front, as the permaculture principle says, mm-hmm. to work out from a controlled front.
It's very interesting, to hear you talk about this, and others talk about similar concepts, and it makes, if we do recognize that the earth itself is a living organism, okay, and we also recognize that right now we are rapidly destroying the life support system on this planet, then it's also it makes sense to recognize that the planet itself as a living organism is going to do something to try to survive.
Yeah.
And that can take many forms, but I think one of the forms that it is taking is a change of consciousness. We often look at human beings and consider ourselves separate from the environment. But we're not. No. We're a product of the life on Earth, of the Earth itself. Yeah. That's what we are.
We're not a product of it, we are it.
Well,
we're part of it.
We're a part of the ecology of the Earth.
Yeah.
And our minds, our brains have evolved over millions and millions of years.
Yeah.
And maybe as the Earth recognizes the threat to its existence, it's changing our consciousness.
Yeah.
And in this day and age, interesting, we're used to social movements taking decades or even hundreds of years to to evolve and change. Although since the Industrial Revolution, that's accelerated tremendously. The changes we've seen, my parents, when they were born, there were predominantly horses and buggies
Yeah.
out there,
Yeah.
and very few cars, and then came cars, and then came telephones, and then computers, and then cell phones, and it's all accelerating, and our ability to communicate is so much faster now,
Yeah.
incredibly faster than the days of the Pony Express,
Yeah.
which was only 150 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And now that also creates the possibility of more rapid change to heal the earth.
Presumably. Hopefully.
Hopefully.
May it be so.
Right.
Yeah.
May it be so,
Yeah.
but again, if we recognize the earth as a living organism, that gives me hope that maybe the earth itself is instituting a change in our consciousness, because we are part of the earth.
Yeah.
That will, living things do what they have to do to survive. They do everything they can to survive. That is the mission of our DNA, is to survive and to reproduce and to keep going as a living organism.
Yeah.
And there is no question that if we continue living the way we have been living, it's not going to result in survival.
Yeah. No.
And so I think that what you're tuning into now is that stream of consciousness that spells survival.
Yeah. Taking our future back. Exactly.
Taking our future back.
Surviving. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, going along with that theme, just to go into the imagery of the Earth being an organism and us being a part of that. So then the natural next question is, if the Earth is an organism, then what are the different organs of the Earth? Because if you could then look at the different systems of the Earth and say, oh, this thing is the liver, these things are the bones, this is the neural net. And I think that you could say that humans are not the entire brain of the Earth.
Right.
What we are is the neocortex. Because what the neocortex is the part of our brain that only us and a few other primates have.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure about dolphins, actually.
Yeah, dolphins, yeah.
That is responsible, we think,
And elephants, maybe.
for self-aware consciousness.
Yeah.
It's the self-reflective part of the brain.
Right.
And so, and you might say that mycelium of fungi are the subconscious part of the brain. Because mycelium act like the brain in the forest floor, in the soil. They tie together trees and other plants and actually send messages, literally,
Right.
between different species. But humans are the neocortex. We're the part specifically of the brain that evolved the latest so far, just like the neocortex is the most recent part of our brains. And we're the self-reflective part that looks back and observes itself and says, we're now taking deliberate action to make deliberate change, whereas perhaps all previous organisms have not been making deliberate change in the Earth systems. They make change, but they don't have self-reflective change.
As far as we know.
As far as we know. Yeah. There could be ancient lost dolphin civilization. But that's a different mainstream TV show. The Appalachian River Dolphin Civilization. That's right. And then in neural development, the way that new ideas come about is through linking neural nets. That's what the neurologists say. The neural scientists is that when we make new ideas, what that is the linking of one existing idea with another through literal forming of synapses between neural nets, which is what we're doing by creating networks like mutual aid societies. Is we're creating more connective tissue, more synapses for information and resources to be exchanged so that new ideas can emerge. So by creating these mid-scale neural nets of mutual aid societies, I think that we're creating the architecture in human culture to then be able to come up with yet more ideas. We have to get organized at a higher level of collaboration before we can even envision the type of future that's going to include human survival in the next 200 years, especially with climate change coming on the way it's going to be coming on.
I'd say the next 2 decades, yeah.
Well, yeah, but especially, yeah, you're right. It's starting now and going out for, depending on the actions we take in the next couple of decades, is going to determine how severe climate change really is. And so I see this.
And if we're going to survive.
It does, yeah. That's right. And so I absolutely, that's why I call this taking our future back to mutual aid societies, because I literally see our future is in the process of being stolen from us by ourselves, our species. And we have to organize at a different level of effectiveness and of creativity and of diversity of mission from any way that human society has ever been organized. Human society has never had to organize or even been able to conceptualize organizing for the type of mission that we now have to organize for
species
to survive.
Survival, basically.
We've never even had to conceptualize that. At the most, in the past, the most that we've had to organize for has been some type of
tribal survival,
political warfare, militaristic, genocide-resisting World War II has been the most severe, scale of survival of a geopolitical, economic, military survival. What we're facing now is an even more complete, more existential type of
life support system survival. Yeah.
And so we have to reconceptualize our whole species. And I don't believe that you and I, sitting here, as smart as we are capable of even imagining the type of responses that we're going to have to be imagining. Permaculture is the closest thing I know of to the ability to conceptualize that, but permaculture has not been practiced at a large enough collaborative scale or by a diverse enough group of cultures and belief system approaches to what's going to be necessary. Permaculture has been limited to too narrow of a cultural scope to get the number of people and thought types engaged that are going to be necessary for our species to survive.
Until now.
But even including now.
Yeah.
Like I said, I just saw a book that came out that is being published by indigenous tribes from Peru. That's a comparison, or in a sense, a challenge to permaculture, saying permaculture has been too focused on the bio-geophysical, the physical mechanisms of ecology and biology and chemistry, and that in itself is actually too small of a picture. Even though it's permaculture, and Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, who designed permaculture, said that this has to be a cultural process and not just an agricultural process, so they call it permaculture. That hasn't been implemented to the degree that is necessary, and it's ignored in a lot of cases the broader scale spiritual, ritual, cultural, relational dynamics that are necessary for sustainable land use systems and sustainable energy systems to actually be implemented in a way that is intergenerational, that passes the knowledge down through generations, and also that doesn't negatively impact one group of people in the process. So, for instance, the state of California said, we want to be carbon negative, so we're going to plant enough trees to offset our carbon output in the next 20 years. Well,
and plus add and take away more carbon dioxide from the trees than we're putting out.
Right, and so that's a cool idea, but one of the strategies they undertook was to hire these to pay for these international carbon credits, which ended up paying in Brazil for the Brazilian government to kick native people off of their land in the Amazon rainforest to plant African palm trees on indigenous land to sequester carbon.
Well, that's just a deceptive, misleading.
But it's a natural, logical result of just focusing on bio-geophysical processes saying, oh, this will sequester carbon without the cultural, relational.
It's still focusing on profit is what it's doing.
That's also part of it.
Yeah.
But that's only an example. Even if we zoom out to a global scale in our carbon initiatives, but we don't understand the cultural component, the value of preserving languages and cultures, then we're going to end up creating yet more warfare and genocide, which actually is one of the root causes of climate change.
Yeah, well, this is a result of not looking at a holistic approach.
Well,
right?
and what I'm saying is we have to define holism as including, we have to make our definition of holism large enough to include feminism, to include cultural
economic
survival,
justice,
to include economic justice, to include mutual belief systems and spiritualities. The holism has to be that holistic. And if it's not, then it's going to fail. And so that's a big insight, and that's one of the things I think is the growing edge of permaculture.
When you say mutual spiritual beliefs or something, that's going to be a tough one. I think rather than having a mutual spiritual
I'm
belief
not saying we
system,
have the same ones. I'm saying that we have to have interconnected ones.
Interconnected, or at least accommodate diverse belief systems. I mean,
At the very least, yeah. I personally believe that there is a way for different spiritual traditions to actually be not only tolerant of each other, but functionally interdependent.
well, so there are certain things that virtually all religions have in common.
Well, that's a different thing, but yes, yeah.
And maybe if we focused on those central values, I think that we could arrive at some common ground there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but also, for instance, it's very difficult actually to have an agricultural system working with forest succession like we do in permaculture that doesn't use pigs to clear land. Because pigs are like animal tractors. They will come in and dig around the roots of trees, push trees down, and without tractors and track hoes and petroleum-based machinery, how do you clear land? Pigs were a big part of that answer in southern Appalachian culture with the Scotch-Irish settlers and everything. So, of course, Jews and Muslims don't keep pigs.
Right.
Those things are not halal, not kosher. But maybe people who are not Jewish and Muslim can keep pigs and be the ones who do that land clearing. And then there are things that in an actual truly permaculture future where we have everybody participating in one degree or another in land use management, Jews and Muslims are doing other parts of land use management, other parts of the farming cycle.
Right.
And there are ways in which we don't demonize other people's ways and belief systems, but have a functionally interdependent land use system. Yeah. So all of this, a mutual aid society, I see again as being beyond the religious and tribal identity. It's a scale of collaboration that does knit people together through economic collaboration beyond clan identity. Not saying clan identity actually I think is a good thing as long as the clans are interdependent with each other.
Right.
So clans
not in opposition.
Exactly.
Right.
And so, but we need that economic collaboration at the core of it, so that it's not a theoretical thing. It's like when we see people who are in our region who are in a different group or clan or whatever, we think, oh, I'm actually part of the same mutual aid network as this person is. We make decisions and support things together.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of big idea behind it, and the idea is to be. I'm starting up this Patreon account in the next 2 months to get funding to begin the process and to get legal advice on how to set the business structures up, and the credit union and the healthcare co-op and the mutual aid society itself. And
so how do people contribute toward the Patreon?
Yeah, well, you can start by going to the WNC Mutual Aid Society Facebook page, and then starting a conversation there. And then as I launch the Patreon account, I'll put the information up there, and there'll be a newsletter starting from that point and a website. But that's the starting point. Is
Talk a little bit about the Patreon.
Yeah.
What is the
Patreon is a really interesting crowdfunding service that exists that was created originally for artists. It's based on the word patron, like a patron of an artist in the old European sense, where rich patrons would help to fund an artist to do their work without the pressure of just selling works and making a living hand to mouth that way. But it's extended beyond just artists to all kinds of socially creative entrepreneurs. And so it's, rather than asking for a lump sum like a lot of crowdfunding does for a certain project, $30,000 for this project or whatever, it asks for a continual salary-based funding on a month-by-month basis. It asks for people to commit, for funders to commit. And through crowdfunding, you could have 500 people committing $3 a month, and that starts to be a significant amount of money. So that's what I'm asking for, is to support not only myself, but an assistant and a fund for getting equipment to begin a podcast. I want to start a podcast that would be all focusing on the realm of mutual aid networks and societies, and to fund us on a regular basis so we have a continuous source of funding for this project.
And I just let me ask you to explain. Right now, you support yourself by teaching permaculture.
Yeah.
I mean, you're
and
a recognized,
permaculture
accredited teacher, and you get paid pretty well for doing that as well, because
I get to survive.
You're very knowledgeable in your field and well respected in that field.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's not like it's somebody you're just asking people to have faith. Basically, that you have a background in this and are recognized in your field.
Yeah, I have a background in permaculture. I've been teaching permaculture for 10 years and doing consulting for landowners in permaculture design. And mutual aid, I do see as regional scale permaculture. I see mutual aid society as regional scale, but there are also huge areas of skill sets and talent and knowledge base that I don't have that are necessary for this. So this is the beginning of a whole new learning adventure for me, and also I am recognizing that the first thing I have to do as I get funding for this is find the right people who do know the right things and do have the right skill sets, who know about credit unions, who know about healthcare co-ops, who know about all the web machinery that's going to be necessary for this to make it succeed.
And you're in a unique position to be able to do that. You're qualified to sort of oversee that process because you are very much tied into a vast network of people who are interested in permaculture and in grassroots activity throughout the nation and the world, for that matter.
Right.
In fact, you'll be going to New Zealand.
Yeah.
You're being paid to go to New Zealand to teach permaculture this January?
I'll be taking a permaculture design certification in February into early March in New Zealand. Yeah, at Tui Eco Village. Yeah. So, I want to mention one more thing, which if people are interested in this larger vision of where democracy in the United States is going, there's this phrase of a pluralistic commonwealth, which is being used by Naomi Klein and one of her collaborators, whose name is skipping my memory right now. But Google the phrase pluralistic commonwealth Naomi Klein, and they have a whole institute that is creating a vision for they're calling it the next system project. It's a deep and comprehensive visioning of not only what a future climate change addressing truly democratic United States political system could look like, but also how to get there. And so that's very inspiring, and please go check out all of their podcasts and articles. And mutual aid is a big theme in their work as well, so that corroborates kind of what I've been thinking of about researching in this realm of mutual aid.
Well, Zev, thank you once again for coming on News from the Roots, and let's continue this discussion. And the phone's ringing. It's perfect timing.
All right.
So we'll see you next time.
Okay.
And thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.